The massive crystalline throne room stretched endlessly upward, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent veins that cast shifting shadows across the assembled alien dignitaries. At the center of this cosmic court sat Zephyrian Prime, the galactic sovereign whose empire spanned 300 star systems. His 6 arms moved in calculated gestures as he addressed the trembling delegates before him, each word carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Another human colony has fallen," he announced, his voice resonating through translation devices that rendered his clicks and whistles into dozens of alien languages. "The species that dared to challenge our expansion continues to crumble before our might." The assembled creatures nodded in approval, their various forms of agreement creating a cacophony of sounds. Some delegates possessed tentacles that writhed with pleasure, while others displayed their satisfaction through color changes across their scaled hides. All shared the same sentiment. Humanity's resistance was finally breaking. In the far corner of the throne room, barely noticed among the towering alien forms, stood Elena Vasquez. The young human woman kept her eyes downcast, her simple gray robes marking her as little more than a servant. To the gathered dignitaries she was invisible, a conquered being whose only purpose was to tend to menial tasks. None of them suspected that behind her quiet demeanor lay one of Earth's most brilliant xenolinguists. Zephyrian Prime's attention suddenly fixed on Elena, his 3 eyes narrowing with cruel amusement. "Ah, our pet human grows bolder," he said, noting how she had stepped slightly closer to hear his words more clearly. "Tell me, little creature, do you understand the fate that awaits your pathetic species?" Elena raised her head slowly, meeting the sovereign's gaze with steady brown eyes. "I understand enough, your supremacy," she replied in perfectly accented Zephyrian, surprising several nearby delegates who hadn't expected such linguistic skill from a human. The sovereign leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "Impressive. Your kind learns our tongue quickly when facing extinction. Perhaps you can appreciate the artistry of our conquest then. Your planet Earth will make an excellent addition to our museum worlds." "A museum?" Elena asked, her voice betraying no emotion despite the chill that ran down her spine. "Indeed. We preserve the most interesting conquered species in vast biodomes. Your people will live comfortable lives as exhibits, breeding and existing for the entertainment of our citizens. Consider it mercy." Zephyrian Prime's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. Elena nodded slowly, as if accepting this terrible fate. Inside, her mind raced with the implications of what she had just learned. The sovereign's casual revelation about museum worlds suggested a pattern of conquest that went far beyond simple territorial expansion. This was systematic cultural genocide, wrapped in the pretense of preservation. "You speak of mercy, your supremacy," Elena said carefully. "But I wonder if you have considered all the variables in your equation." The throne room fell silent. Several delegates turned to stare at the audacious human who dared to question their leader. Zephyrian Prime's expression shifted from amusement to dangerous interest. "Variables?" he repeated, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Explain yourself, pet." Elena took a deep breath, knowing she was walking on a razor's edge. "In my studies of galactic linguistics, I have learned that every species possesses unique gifts. Some excel at warfare, others at technology or art. But there are always unexpected capabilities that emerge under pressure, such as the sovereign's middle eye fixed on her with laser intensity. Communication, your supremacy. The ability to understand and speak with beings that others consider mere beasts." Elena's words carried a subtle weight that only she fully understood. Zephyrian Prime threw back his head and released a sound that was part roar, part laughter. "You speak of fairy tales, human. Your kind's supposed connection to lower life forms is nothing but primitive superstition." But Elena had planted the seed she intended. Around the throne room, she noticed several delegates exchanging glances. The concept of interspecies communication was not unknown among the galaxy's older civilizations, though most dismissed it as legend. That night, as Elena returned to her small quarters in the servant levels of the orbital station, she activated a hidden recording device. Her fingers moved quickly across its surface as she documented everything she had observed and learned. The sovereign's casual mention of museum worlds was just the beginning. If she could prove that humans possessed abilities the aliens didn't understand or respect, she might be able to change the course of the war entirely. The device chirped softly as it completed its data compression. Elena sealed the recording in a memory crystal no larger than her thumbnail and slipped it into a hidden compartment sewn into her robes. Tomorrow, she would need to find a way to get this information to the human resistance network scattered across the occupied territories. As she prepared for sleep, Elena's thoughts turned to the ancient legends from her homeworld. Stories of humans who could speak with wolves, dolphins, and other creatures. Most dismissed these tales as mythology, but Elena had spent years studying the linguistic patterns of various species. She had begun to suspect that these legends might contain more truth than anyone realized. The next morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities to gather intelligence, and perhaps the chance to test a theory that could change everything. Elena closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to whatever forces might be listening, hoping that her dangerous game of deception would not be discovered before she could complete her mission. Outside her small window, the stars wheeled silently in their courses, bearing witness to a conflict that would soon take an unexpected turn. The Galactic Sovereign had no idea that his casual cruelty toward a seemingly insignificant human servant would set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of his empire. 3 days after her confrontation with Zephyrian Prime, Elena found herself assigned to the station's lower levels, ostensibly as punishment for her boldness. The damp corridors reeked of recycled air and industrial chemicals, a sharp contrast to the pristine upper decks where the alien elite conducted their business. But Elena quickly realized this reassignment was a blessing in disguise. The lower levels housed the station's life support systems, including the massive biocontainment units that maintained atmospheric conditions for dozens of different species. More importantly, they contained the holding areas for various alien creatures that the Sovereign kept for his personal amusement. It was here that Elena first heard the sound that would change everything. A low, haunting howl echoed through the metal corridors as she carried cleaning supplies toward the waste processing center. The sound sent shivers down her spine, not from fear but from recognition. Years of studying animal communication patterns had trained her ear to detect subtle variations in vocalizations. This was no random animal cry, it carried structure, meaning intelligence. Following the sound through a maze of service tunnels, Elena discovered a massive containment cell hidden deep within the station's bowels. Inside, pacing behind energy barriers, was a creature unlike anything she had ever seen. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, with the general shape of a wolf but covered in scales that shifted color with its movements. Its eyes glowed with an inner fire, and when it saw Elena approach, it stopped pacing and fixed her with an intensely intelligent stare. "Hello," Elena whispered in Standard Galactic, the common trade language used throughout the Empire. The creature tilted its massive head and responded with a complex series of growls, barks, and tonal variations that made Elena's trained mind race with excitement. The vocalizations followed patterns she had studied in Earth's wolf populations, but with additional layers of complexity that suggested a highly developed communication system. Over the following weeks, Elena managed to visit the creature whenever her duties brought her to the lower levels. She began to document its vocalizations, noting how different sounds corresponded to different emotional states and apparent meanings. The breakthrough came when she realized the creature was not just making random sounds, it was trying to teach her its language. The massive wolf-like being, which Elena had begun thinking of as her teacher, would point with its snout toward objects in its cell while making specific sounds. Water had one tone, food another, the energy barriers a third. Gradually, Elena began to understand that she was learning not just a language, but a sophisticated method of communication that incorporated body language, scent markers, and even subtle electromagnetic fields that the creature could apparently detect and manipulate. During one particularly intense session, the creature suddenly backed away from the barrier and fixed Elena with a stare that seemed to pierce her soul. When it spoke, the sounds were different than before, more urgent, more desperate. "Danger," Elena whispered, somehow understanding the meaning despite the alien nature of the communication. "You're trying to warn me about danger." The creature nodded, a surprisingly human gesture, then began a complex series of vocalizations that Elena strained to follow. Images formed in her mind as she listened, not visual images but conceptual ones. She saw vast fleets of ships, worlds burning, populations being herded into enclosures like cattle. But underneath this vision of conquest, she sensed something else. A growing network of resistance. Creatures like this one scattered across the galaxy, waiting for someone who could understand their warnings. "Who are you?" Elena asked, though she wasn't sure if the creature could understand standard Galactic. The response came not in words, but in a flood of concepts that made Elena's head spin. Ancient civilizations, genetic manipulation, weapons of impossible power, and underneath it all, a name that roughly translated to the Guardians of the Silent Tongue. Elena's heart raced as she began to understand the implications. This creature and others like it were not random animals collected by the Sovereign for entertainment. They were survivors of a species that had once ruled vast portions of the galaxy, using their unique communication abilities to coordinate resistance against tyrannical empires. The Zephyrians had captured them, not understanding their true nature, and had been using them as exotic pets while sitting on top of the galaxy's most sophisticated intelligence network. "You've been gathering information," Elena said, the pieces falling into place. "You and your kind have been watching, listening, learning about the Sovereign's plans." The creature's response carried undertones of desperate hope. Elena sensed that her species, humanity, represented something the Guardians had been searching for across the centuries. Humans possessed a unique neurological flexibility that allowed them to learn and adapt to different forms of communication more easily than most species. Where other civilizations relied on technology for translation, humans could develop intuitive understanding of alien languages and communication methods. Elena realized she was looking at the key to turning the tide of the galactic war. The Sovereign had unknowingly assembled the perfect intelligence network, and now Elena had found a way to access it. But the revelation came with terrifying implications. If Zephyrian Prime discovered what she was learning, the consequences would extend far beyond her own death. As she prepared to leave the containment area, the Guardian fixed her with one final intense stare. The message was clear without needing translation. Time was running out. The Sovereign's plans for humanity were accelerating, and if Elena was going to act on this new knowledge, she would need to move quickly. That night, Elena updated her hidden recordings with everything she had learned. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, an entire galactic civilization reduced to pets and exhibits, their true nature hidden even from their captors. But now Elena had found the first thread that might unravel the entire Zephyrian empire. She fell asleep to the sound of distant howls echoing through the station's ventilation systems, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to delve deeper into the secret language of the Guardians. Elena's growing connection with the Guardian had not gone unnoticed. Security Chief Korthak, a hulking reptilian with cybernetic implants covering half his skull, began monitoring her movements more closely. His suspicions were aroused not by anything Elena had done wrong, but by the subtle changes in the lower-level security readings. The Guardian's emotional state had shifted dramatically since Elena's visits began, and sophisticated monitoring equipment was picking up electromagnetic anomalies that corresponded with their communication sessions. The human servant shows unusual interest in the waste processing levels. Korthak reported to Zephyrian Prime during their weekly security briefing. Her biometric readings suggest excitement and mental stimulation during visits to areas that should hold nothing but maintenance equipment. The Sovereign's three eyes narrowed as he considered this information. Perhaps our pet human is not as simple as she appears. Increase surveillance, but do not interfere yet. I am curious to see what she thinks she can accomplish. Meanwhile, Elena had made a breakthrough that changed everything. During her latest session with the Guardian, she had attempted something that seemed impossible, trying to respond using the same electromagnetic patterns she had sensed during their conversations. To her amazement, the Guardian's reaction was immediate and intense. The massive creature had backed away from the barrier, its scales shifting to colors she had never seen before, and its response carried undertones of shock and hope. You can feel the deep currents the Guardian had communicated, the meaning becoming clearer in Elena's mind than any words could have been. Your species carries the ancient gift. Through a series of increasingly complex exchanges, Elena learned that the Guardian's communication method was not merely vocal or electromagnetic. It tapped into what they called the deep currents, quantum fields that connected all living beings across vast distances. Most species could only perceive these fields unconsciously, if at all, but a rare few possessed the neurological flexibility to access them directly. The implications staggered Elena. If humans could learn to use the deep currents, They could communicate instantly across any distance, coordinate resistance efforts without fear of technological interference, and potentially access the accumulated knowledge of every Guardian scattered throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire's greatest strength, their vast size and distributed territories, could become their greatest weakness if their enemies could communicate faster than their official channels. But Elena's excitement was tempered by a growing sense of urgency. The Guardian had shared disturbing information about the Sovereign's timeline for the final assault on Earth. Zephyrian Prime was not content with simple conquest. He planned to use humanity as test subjects for a new form of biological warfare that would make resistance impossible for any future civilizations he encountered. The Deathmakers seek to break the spirit bond, the Guardian explained during one of their sessions. They have learned that conquest of the body is not enough. They must crush the connection between mind and soul that allows resistance to grow. Elena shuddered as she grasped the meaning. The Zephyrians had developed psychobiological weapons designed to sever the neurological pathways that allowed independent thought and emotional connection. If deployed against Earth's population, these weapons would create perfect slaves, humans who retained their technical skills and intelligence but lost their capacity for rebellion, creativity, or hope. The horror of this revelation was compounded by Elena's realization that she was probably the only human in a position to prevent it. The resistance networks scattered across Earth and the occupied territories had no idea what they were truly facing. They were preparing for conventional warfare against an enemy that planned to attack their very consciousness. That night, Elena made a decision that would either save her species or doom them all. Using techniques the Guardian had taught her, she attempted to reach out through the deep currents to make contact with other Guardians across the galaxy. The process was exhausting, requiring her to maintain a meditative state for hours while slowly expanding her awareness beyond the confines of her physical body. The first contact came as a whisper of thought from a Guardian imprisoned on a Zephyrian mining world 3 sectors away. The communication was brief and fragmentary, but it confirmed Elena's hopes. There were dozens of Guardians scattered throughout the Empire, all connected through the deep currents, all waiting for someone who could serve as a bridge between their network and the human resistance. Through this expanding web of consciousness, Elena began to piece together the true scope of the Zephyrian threat. The Empire was not merely conquering worlds, it was systematically destroying every species' capacity for spiritual and emotional growth. The museum worlds were not preserves but laboratories where conquered populations were studied, experimented upon, and gradually reduced to empty shells of their former selves. But the Guardians had been planning their own resistance for centuries. Hidden within their network of communication was a vast repository of knowledge about Zephyrian weaknesses, technological vulnerabilities, and strategic blind spots. They had been waiting for a species with both the technological capability and the spiritual flexibility to serve as their active agents in the physical world. Elena realized she was looking at the foundation of a galactic uprising that could free hundreds of enslaved civilizations. But first, she had to find a way to get this information to the human resistance without alerting Zephyrian security to what she had discovered. The next morning brought an unexpected opportunity. Zephyrian Prime announced that he would be conducting a personal inspection of Earth's defenses within the month, taking his flagship directly to the Sol system to oversee the final preparations for humanity's subjugation. Elena saw her chance. If she could somehow get aboard that flagship, she might be able to reach Earth with the knowledge that could save her species. But such a plan would require resources and allies that a simple servant could never access alone. As she pondered the seemingly impossible challenge ahead, Elena felt a familiar presence touch her mind through the deep currents. The Guardian's message was simple but powerful. You do not walk this path alone. The time of awakening approaches. Elena's plan crystallized during a routine diplomatic gathering in the station's Grand Assembly Hall. Representatives from dozens of allied species had arrived to witness Zephyrian Prime's announcement of the final phase of the human conquest. As she served refreshments to the gathered delegates, Elena listened carefully to their conversations, noting which species seemed most enthusiastic about humanity's destruction, and which appeared uncomfortable with the Sovereign's increasingly brutal methods. One delegate in particular caught her Attention, Ambassador Thylex of the Andromedans, a species known for their philosophical approach to galactic politics. Unlike the other representatives who cheered at each description of human suffering, Thylex remained silent, his four eyes reflecting what Elena interpreted as moral conflict. During a break in the proceedings, Elena approached the ambassador's table to refill his drink. As she poured, she whispered in Andromedan, "The deep currents speak of change coming to the galaxy." Thylex's reaction was immediate and telling. His eyes widened slightly, and he turned to study Elena with new interest. The phrase she had used was known only to practitioners of ancient Andromedan mysticism, a philosophy that taught the interconnectedness of all consciousness. Interesting choice of words. "Young human," Thylex replied in the same language. "Few among the younger species understand such concepts." Elena continued her service duties but managed to convey, through careful word choices and subtle gestures, that she possessed knowledge far beyond what her position should have allowed. Thylex, intrigued despite himself, agreed to meet her in private to discuss what he clearly suspected was something significant. Their clandestine meeting took place in the station's botanical gardens, where the sounds of artificial waterfalls and alien bird songs would mask their conversation from surveillance equipment. Elena took an enormous risk by revealing part of what she had learned about the Guardian's network, but Thylex's response convinced her the gamble was worthwhile. "By the eternal streams," Thylex breathed when Elena finished her explanation. "The old legends were true. The Guardians still exist, and they have been watching, waiting, planning all this time." Elena learned that the Andromedans possessed ancient records of the Guardian civilization, texts that described their mastery of consciousness-based communication and their role as protectors against tyrannical empires. Most Andromedans believed these records were mythology, but Thylex belonged to a small sect that maintained faith in their historical accuracy. "If what you say is true," Thylex continued, "then the Sovereign sits atop a powder keg that could destroy his entire empire. But how do you propose to ignite the fuse?" Elena outlined her plan to reach Earth with the Guardian's accumulated intelligence. Thylex listened in growing amazement as she described the scope of information available through the Deep Currents network. Detailed schematics of Zephyrian weapons, locations of key installations, communication protocols, and, most importantly, the specific vulnerabilities in the psychobiological weapons that threatened humanity's consciousness. "You speak of boarding the Sovereign's flagship," Thylex said thoughtfully. "Such a feat would be impossible for someone of your apparent station. But perhaps, yes, there might be a way." The ambassador explained that his diplomatic shuttle was scheduled to accompany Zephyrian Prime's fleet to Earth, where he would officially witness humanity's final subjugation. If Elena could somehow be transferred to his delegation as a cultural advisor, she could travel aboard the shuttle and potentially gain access to the flagship during the journey. But such an arrangement would require extensive documentation and official approval from multiple departments. Elena realized she would need allies within the station's administrative structure, people who could be convinced or coerced into facilitating her transfer. The solution came from an unexpected source. Through her expanding connection to the Guardian's network, Elena learned that she was not the only human on the station with hidden capabilities. Dr. Marcus Chen, a xenobiologist who had been captured during the fall of the Tau Ceti colonies, had been working in the station's research laboratories, while secretly documenting Zephyrian biotechnology. Chen had not yet developed the ability to communicate through the deep currents, but his scientific background made him an ideal candidate for learning the Guardian's techniques. Elena began visiting him under the pretense of delivering supplies to the research levels, and during these brief encounters, she taught him the basic principles of consciousness-based communication. The transformation in Chen was remarkable. Within days of beginning his training, he was able to sense the Guardian's presence throughout the station. More importantly, his position in the research hierarchy gave him access to administrative systems that Elena could never reach from her servant quarters. "There are 12 Guardians on this station alone," Chen reported during one of their clandestine meetings. "They have been cataloging every detail of Zephyrian technology and strategy for years. The amount of intelligence data we could access is staggering." Together, Elena and Chen began implementing a complex plan that would require split-second timing and considerable luck. Chen would use his administrative access to create the documentation needed for Elena's transfer to Thylex's delegation. Meanwhile, Elena would work with the Guardian Network to coordinate a distraction that would prevent security from scrutinizing the transfer too closely. The distraction came in the form of a coordinated behavioral change among all the Guardians in the station's menagerie. At precisely the moment Elena's transfer was being processed, every captured Guardian began exhibiting signs of extreme agitation. Their electromagnetic emanations spiked beyond normal parameters. Their vocalizations increased in volume and frequency, and several began displaying aggressive behaviors they had never shown before. Security. Chief Korthak found himself dealing with what appeared to be a spontaneous uprising among the station's exotic animal collection. While his attention was focused on containing this apparent crisis, Elena's paperwork passed through the administrative system with minimal scrutiny. By the time Korthak realized that the Guardian uprising had been precisely timed to coincide with administrative anomalies, Elena was already aboard Ambassador Thylex's shuttle, officially designated as a specialist in human cultural practices who would assist with the transition ceremonies following Earth's conquest. As the shuttle prepared to depart the station, Elena felt the collective presence of the Guardians through the deep currents. Their message was clear. The first phase of the Galactic uprising had begun. Now Elena had to reach Earth with information that could transform humanity from victims into the catalyst for the greatest rebellion in galactic history. But Zephyrian Prime was not completely oblivious to the undercurrents of conspiracy surrounding him. As his massive flagship prepared for the journey to Sol system, he issued orders that would test Elena's abilities and resolve to their absolute limits. The journey to Earth aboard Ambassador Thylex's diplomatic shuttle provided Elena with her first opportunity to fully explore the extent of the Guardian network. As the small vessel traveled within the protective formation surrounding Zephyrian Prime's massive flagship, Elena spent hours in deep meditation, reaching out through the quantum currents to contact Guardians across dozens of star systems. What she discovered exceeded her wildest expectations. The network was not merely an intelligence-gathering operation. It was a sophisticated resistance organization that had been preparing for this moment for over 3 centuries. Guardians on every major world in the Zephyrian Empire had been documenting weaknesses, mapping strategic locations, and identifying potential allies among the conquered populations. "The scope is overwhelming," Elena confided to Thylex during one of their private conversations. "They have detailed plans for simultaneous uprisings across the entire empire, but everything depends on the signal being sent from Earth." Thylex nodded gravely. "Your world has become the symbol of resistance throughout the galaxy. If humanity falls completely, hope dies with it. But if Earth can demonstrate that the Zephyrians are not invincible, it will inspire every enslaved civilization to rise up." Through her connection to the deep currents, Elena learned that the Guardian Network had identified a critical flaw in the Zephyrian command structure. The Empire's vast size required constant communication between the Sovereign and his sector commanders. This communication relied on quantum entanglement networks that, while theoretically secure, could be disrupted by precisely coordinated electromagnetic pulses generated through the Guardian's consciousness-based abilities. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. At the moment when Zephyrian Prime issued the order for Earth's final conquest, every Guardian across the galaxy would simultaneously focus their consciousness-based electromagnetic abilities on disrupting the Empire's communication network. The resulting chaos would provide Earth's defenders with a crucial window of opportunity while also triggering uprisings on dozens of occupied worlds, but the plan required someone with the ability to coordinate the timing across vast interstellar distances, someone who could serve as a focal point for the entire Guardian network. Elena realized with growing dread that she had become the linchpin upon which the fate of galactic civilization now rested. As the fleet approached the Sol system, Elena faced an additional challenge. Zephyrian Prime had become suspicious of the recent disturbances on his station and had ordered enhanced security screenings for all diplomatic personnel. Elena's false credentials were sophisticated, but they might not withstand the kind of intensive scrutiny the Sovereign was now demanding. The solution came from Dr. Chen. who had used his continued access to the station's research databases to plant false records supporting Elena's cover identity. More importantly, he had discovered something that changed Elena's mission entirely. The Sovereign's flagship carried not just weapons and troops, but also a prototype of the consciousness-disrupting weapon intended for use against Earth's population. If they deploy that device, Chen's message reached Elena through the deep currents. It won't matter if we disrupt their communications. Every human on Earth will be reduced to a mindless drone within hours of exposure. Elena realized she now faced a dual mission. Not only did she need to coordinate the galaxy-wide uprising, but she also had to find a way to sabotage or capture the consciousness weapon before it could be used. The task seemed impossible for one person, but through the Guardian network, she learned that she would not be acting alone. 3 Guardians were imprisoned aboard the Sovereign's flagship itself, held in the ship's exotic creature collection for the amusement of high-ranking officers. If Elena could reach them, she might be able to coordinate a sabotage mission from within the vessel's most heavily defended sections. The opportunity came when Zephyrian Prime decided to showcase his collection to the assembled diplomatic corps. As part of the pre-invasion ceremonies, delegates were invited aboard the flagship for a grand feast featuring delicacies from conquered worlds and entertainment provided by exotic creatures from across the Empire. Elena accompanied Thylex to the event, her heart racing as she stepped aboard the massive vessel that housed some of the galaxy's most closely guarded secrets. The flagship was a city in space, its corridors stretching for kilometers through dozens of decks. But through her connection to the deep currents, Elena could sense the 3 imprisoned Guardians calling to her from deep within the ship's lower levels. The formal dinner provided the perfect cover for Elena's reconnaissance mission. While Zephyrian Prime regaled his guests with tales of conquest and domination, Elena slipped away from the main gathering, using her servant training to move through the ship's service corridors without attracting attention. The Guardian's prison was located in the entertainment district, where high-ranking officers could visit the creature menagerie during their off-duty hours. Elena found the 3 massive wolf-like beings confined in separate cells, their electromagnetic emanations damped by sophisticated containment fields. But when they sensed her approach, their collective response nearly overwhelmed her unprepared mind. "The weapon makers gather above us," the eldest Guardian communicated through the deep currents. "The Mind Killer sleeps in the Chamber of Forbidden Arts, 3 levels beneath the throne of the False King." Elena realized they were describing the location of the consciousness-disrupting weapon. It was housed in the ship's most secure laboratory, directly below Zephyrian Prime's personal quarters. Reaching it would require navigating through the heavily guarded command section of the vessel. "I cannot do this alone," Elena admitted to the Guardians. "You will not be alone," came the reply. "When the moment arrives, every Guardian across the stars will lend you their strength. But first you must return to the gathering above. The False King plans a demonstration that will reveal much about his true intentions." Elena made her way back to the diplomatic feast, arriving just as Zephyrian Prime was beginning what he announced as a special presentation. To Elena's horror, she realized the Sovereign planned to demonstrate a scaled-down version of the consciousness weapon on captured human prisoners brought specifically for this purpose. As she watched in growing revulsion, Elena understood that she was about to witness a preview of humanity's fate. But she also realized that this demonstration would provide her with crucial information about the weapon's operation and vulnerabilities. The knowledge she gained in the next few minutes would determine whether her mission succeeded or failed catastrophically. The demonstration was about to begin, and Elena steeled herself to observe horrors that would either break her spirit or forge it into an instrument of liberation for the entire galaxy. The demonstration chamber fell silent as Zephyrian Prime activated a holographic display showing Earth from orbit. The blue marble hung suspended in the artificial starfield, beautiful and vulnerable, while the assembled delegates watched with varying degrees of anticipation and unease. "Honored guests," the Sovereign began, his voice carrying undertones of sadistic pleasure. "What you are about to witness represents the pinnacle of our psychological warfare research. Observe how quickly even the most rebellious spirit can be pacified." 3 human prisoners were brought into the chamber, resistance fighters captured during recent battles in the outer colonies. Elena recognized one of them, Commander Sarah Mitchell, who had led the defense of Proxima Station before its fall 6 months earlier. The sight of her former colleague in chains sent waves of rage and determination through Elena's consciousness. The consciousness-disrupting device was wheeled into position, a sleek crystalline construct that hummed with barely contained energy. As Elena watched its operation, she used her connection to the deep currents to analyze its quantum signatures, memorizing every detail that might reveal a weakness. The weapon's effect was immediate and horrifying. Within seconds of activation, the 3 prisoners' expressions shifted from defiance to blank confusion. The light of intelligence faded from their eyes, replaced by an empty docility that made Elena's stomach clench with revulsion. As you can see, Zephyrian Prime explained to his fascinated audience, the subjects retain their motor functions and basic cognitive abilities, but their capacity for independent thought has been severed. They will follow any command without question, while remaining intellectually capable enough to perform complex tasks. But Elena noticed something the Sovereign had missed. Through her enhanced perception via the deep currents, she could sense that the consciousness disruption was not as complete as it appeared. Deep within each prisoner's mind, a small core of awareness remained intact, isolated but not destroyed. The weapon damaged the neural pathways that connected consciousness to action, but it did not eliminate consciousness itself. This revelation was transmitted instantly to the Guardian network, where ancient minds began analyzing the implications. If the consciousness could be preserved even under the weapon's influence, there might be a way to restore the severed connections. The Guardian's mastery of consciousness-based communication suggested potential healing techniques that the Zephyrians had never considered. The demonstration concluded with Zephyrian Prime ordering the controlled prisoners to perform various tasks, showcasing their retention of skills despite their loss of free will. Elena forced herself to watch every detail, knowing that understanding the weapon's exact effects would be crucial for developing countermeasures. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, discussing the implications of what they had witnessed, Elena lingered behind on the pretext of cleaning up after the gathering. This gave her the opportunity to approach the consciousness-disrupting device while the guards' attention was focused elsewhere. Using techniques the Guardians had taught her, Elena extended her consciousness toward the weapon's quantum matrix. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The device was not just a prototype. It was the master control unit for a network of similar weapons already deployed throughout the Zephyrian fleet. When activated simultaneously, they could blanket an entire planet with consciousness-disrupting fields. But Elena also identified the device's critical vulnerability. The quantum entanglement network that linked all the weapons together created a resonance pattern that could be disrupted if the proper frequency was broadcast through the deep currents. The Guardian's consciousness-based abilities could theoretically generate such a frequency, but it would require perfect coordination across the entire galactic network. Elena memorized the resonance patterns and transmitted them immediately to the Guardian Collective. The response came as a wave of grim determination from hundreds of ancient minds across dozens of star systems. They would be ready when the moment came. But Elena would need to initiate the disruption sequence from the master control unit itself. This meant she would have to infiltrate the ship's most secure laboratory during the actual invasion of Earth. While the device was active and heavily guarded, the task seemed suicidal, but Elena realized she had advantages the Zephyrians could not anticipate. The 3 Guardians, imprisoned aboard the flagship, had been carefully analyzing the ship's internal structure and security systems for months. Through the deep currents, they shared detailed maps of ventilation systems, emergency access routes, and guard rotation schedules. More importantly, they had identified key personnel whose psychological profiles suggested they might be susceptible to consciousness-based influence. The Mindbenders have grown arrogant, the eldest Guardian communicated. They believe their technology makes them immune to the old ways. They do not shield their thoughts as carefully as they should. Elena understood the implication. The Guardians could potentially influence certain crew members at critical moments, creating distractions or opening secured doors at precisely the right times. It would not be direct control. The Guardians' ethics prohibited such violations, but subtle suggestions that amplified existing doubts or fears could prove decisive. The invasion, of Earth began 3 days later. Elena watched from the flagship's observation deck as Zephyrian Prime's forces deployed around the Sol system, their formation designed to prevent any possibility of human escape or reinforcement. The sight of her homeworld surrounded by enemy vessels filled Elena with a mixture of rage and desperate determination, but she was no longer the frightened servant who had first encountered Zephyrian Prime months earlier. Through her connection to the Guardian network, Elena had become something new, a focal point for the consciousness and determination of dozens of ancient civilizations that refused to bow to tyranny. As the Sovereign issued his final ultimatum to Earth's defenders, Elena felt the Guardian network activate across the galaxy. On hundreds of worlds, imprisoned Guardians began focusing their consciousness-based abilities on the quantum frequencies that held the Zephyrian communication network together. The uprising was about to begin, and Elena stood at its epicenter. The moment had arrived for humanity to discover whether the power of consciousness and connection could overcome the most advanced weapons technology in the galaxy. Elena closed her eyes, reached out through the deep currents to touch the minds of every Guardian across the stars, and prepared to either save galactic civilization or die in the attempt. The battle for Earth, and for the future of consciousness itself, was about to commence. The final assault on Earth began at dawn, Greenwich time. From her position on the flagship's command deck, Elena watched as Zephyrian Prime's forces descended toward her homeworld like a metallic storm. But as the Sovereign prepared to activate the consciousness-disrupting weapons that would reduce humanity to mindless slaves, Elena felt the Guardian network reaching its moment of perfect unity. "Now," whispered the voice of the eldest Guardian through the deep currents, and Elena acted. Her consciousness exploded outward through quantum space, connecting with hundreds of Guardian minds across the galaxy. For one impossible moment, she became the living embodiment of every species' desire for freedom. The combined will of ancient civilizations flowed through her as she reached toward the master control device 3 decks below. The effect was immediate and devastating to the Zephyrian command structure. Across the entire empire, quantum communication networks began failing as Guardian-generated electromagnetic pulses disrupted entanglement fields. On world after world, enslaved populations looked up to see their oppressors' coordination collapsing into chaos. But Zephyrian Prime was no fool. The moment his communication systems began failing, he realized the scope of the conspiracy arrayed against him. His rage was terrible to behold as he ordered the immediate activation of all consciousness-disrupting weapons, determined to complete humanity's subjugation. Even if it meant acting without coordination from his scattered forces, Elena felt the weapons powering up and knew she had only minutes before Earth's population would be reduced to hollow shells. Using the ship schematics provided by the imprisoned Guardians, she slipped away from the command deck and began making her way toward the secure laboratories, and the corridors echoed with alarms and the sounds of officers shouting contradictory orders as the communication breakdown spread panic throughout the ship. Elena used the chaos to her advantage, moving through maintenance passages and service ducts while the crew struggled to understand what was happening to their seemingly invincible empire. She reached the laboratory level just as the consciousness-disrupting device reached full power. Through the reinforced viewing windows, Elena could see the crystalline weapon matrix pulsing with malevolent energy. Guards stood at every entrance, but their attention was focused on external threats. None of them expected an attack from within their own ship. The 3 imprisoned Guardians had been waiting for this moment. As Elena approached the laboratory, their combined consciousness reached out to touch the minds of the guards. They did not control or command, but simply amplified the fear and confusion that already existed in those alien minds. Doubts about the mission's morality, concerns about the communication failures, and half-remembered legends about ancient powers. All these thoughts suddenly seemed urgent and compelling. One by one, the guards found reasons to step away from their posts. Emergency calls from other sections, concerns about security breaches elsewhere, personal fears about the ship's failing systems. Within minutes, the laboratory stood momentarily undefended. Elena slipped inside and approached the master control unit. The device was beautiful in its complexity, a fusion of quantum mechanics and crystalline technology that represented centuries of research into consciousness manipulation. But Elena could see the resonance patterns she had memorized. the quantum frequencies that held the entire network together. Through the deep currents, she felt the Guardian network focusing its combined will through her consciousness. Ancient minds that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations lent their strength to a young human woman who had learned to speak their language. The irony was not lost on any of them. The Zephyrian Empire would be brought down by the very creatures they had dismissed as mere animals. Elena placed her hands on the control interface and let the Guardian network flow through her. Her consciousness expanded beyond anything she had ever experienced as hundreds of ancient minds merged temporarily with her own. She could feel every Guardian across the galaxy, from those imprisoned on Zephyrian vessels to those hidden in the deepest dungeons of conquered worlds. The resonance frequency built slowly at first, then with increasing intensity as more Guardians joined the collective effort. The consciousness-disrupting weapons began to vibrate in harmony, their quantum fields oscillating in patterns their designers had never intended. Zephyrian Prime burst into the laboratory just as Elena initiated the final phase of the disruption sequence. His 3 eyes blazed with fury as he raised a plasma weapon, but he was too late. The resonance cascade was already spreading through the quantum network that connected every consciousness-disrupting device in the galaxy. "You pathetic creature," the Sovereign snarled. "You have no idea what forces you are meddling with." Elena looked up at him with eyes that now reflected the wisdom of ages. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that should have been impossible for human vocal cords to produce. "I know exactly what I am doing. Zephyrian Prime. I am giving consciousness back to the galaxy." The weapons network collapsed in a cascade of quantum feedback that sent shockwaves through every Zephyrian installation in the Empire. Not only were the consciousness-disrupting devices neutralized, but their destruction created a pulse that temporarily disrupted all Zephyrian technology, based on similar quantum principles. Across the galaxy, enslaved populations felt their minds clearing as suppressor fields failed. On hundreds of worlds, beings who had lived in artificial docility for generations suddenly remembered who they had been before the conquest. The uprisings that followed were spontaneous, coordinated by the Guardian network and utterly devastating to Zephyrian control. But the immediate situation remained dangerous. Zephyrian Prime, his empire crumbling around him, had become a cornered animal driven by rage and desperation. His plasma weapon was still trained on Elena, and his finger was tightening on the trigger. The rescue came from an unexpected source. Commander Sarah Mitchell and her fellow prisoners had been in the ship's detention center when the consciousness-disrupting effects were reversed. The restoration of their mental faculties, combined with their knowledge of the ship's layout from their earlier capture, had allowed them to break free and fight their way toward the laboratory. They burst through the laboratory entrance just as Zephyrian Prime fired. Mitchell threw herself between Elena and the plasma bolt, taking the hit but buying enough time for the other resistance fighters to overwhelm the Sovereign's guards. Elena knelt beside Mitchell as the commander's life ebbed away. Did we save them?" Mitchell whispered. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Earth is free. The galaxy is free. The Guardian's message is spreading to every world." Mitchell smiled and closed her eyes. Then it was worth it. The aftermath of the Guardian Rising, as historians would later call it, saw the complete collapse of the Zephyrian Empire within 6 months. Without their communication networks and consciousness suppression technology, the scattered Zephyrian forces found themselves facing coordinated rebellions on every occupied world. Elena returned to Earth as humanity's first ambassador to the Galactic Guardian Council, a new organization formed by the liberated species of hundreds of worlds. The humans' unique ability to learn Guardian communication techniques made them natural mediators and coordinators for the reconstruction efforts. But Elena never forgot the price of freedom, or the ancient voices that still whispered through the deep currents, sharing their wisdom with any consciousness brave enough to listen. The galaxy had learned that the power of connection and communication could overcome even the most advanced weapons, and that sometimes the most profound strength came from the most unexpected sources. The wolves of consciousness had taught the galaxy to howl together, and their song would echo across the stars for generations to come.